My name is Doug Downs.
And my name is Fazana Baduel. Our guest this week is Fred Cook, joining us from Los Angeles. Hi, Fred.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are things in glamorous LA?
It looks like a beautiful day in LA, and it always is, so I think it's good.
Now, Fred, for our audience, you are the director of USC Center for Public Relations at the Annenberg School, where you guide the next generation of communication leaders. You are the chair emeritus of Golin, where you led global campaigns for brands like McDonald's, Nintendo, and Toyota over a 30-year career. Most recently, you spearheaded the Mind the Gap report, revealing sharp generational divides shaping the future of the PR industry.
So, Fred,
Yes.
your job is to teach the next gen coming up. What kind of freaking mess are we leaving behind for the next generation? Because this is an industry, as we know it, that may no longer exist in the same way and shape.
Well, it's definitely a period of great disruption right now with AI coming on the scene and people working remotely and the media changing and polarization, all these things we studied in Mind the Gap. But I think we found in our research that Gen Z, the generation that's coming up into the public relation profession, is really where the puck is going. They're already there. So I think I have a renewed confidence in their ability to manage all of these changes and lead us into the future.
What
It's
do you
going to be
think
one resilient generation because we're putting so much on them that way. Are your sense when you work with the young generation, are they ready for this? That they're shouldering a lot.
Well, I think there are a lot of people like me who have put a lot of weight on their shoulders in terms of fixing all the problems that my generation created. And I don't think that's really fair. I don't think they're going to change the world necessarily. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and we thought we were changing the world, and everything went back to being the same. So I think that it's not a good idea to put that on their backs. But I do think that as far as communications is concerned, that they're very comfortable with where things are headed, and I think they'll be able to manage it much better than probably the older generation would be able to.
Fred, I read your report, and what struck me is just how difficult it is for a PR person to communicate across different generations, because already the media landscape is so fragmented. When I grew up, we had a couple of broadcast channels, a couple of print, and then all of a sudden you've got this plethora of social media platforms. And now on top of that, you've got generational sort of segmentation. And so from a PR perspective, if our budgets aren't rising alongside the complexity of communicating across generational divides, what sort of advice would you give us how to navigate if actually it's not about communicating to one generation or the other, we have to communicate to both? How would we do that when we then have to then come up with almost sort of two separate programs?
Well, that's an interesting question. And it is true that people are receiving information from very different sources, especially the older and the young. And we saw that in our survey. Our survey was of PR people, and they're representative of the broader landscape. I think you have to use all different channels now and to reach people. And you have to decide which audience is the most important and put your emphasis on that. The channels that get to them are all very different, but sometimes the messages can be the same, but you just have to find different channels for them. And it's much more dispersed. You're reaching smaller groups of people, like a podcast like this reaches a few thousand people, and you have to have a lot of little things that build up to a bigger thing that accomplishes your goals. But I think that it's not as complicated as it sounds when you understand these different channels and you know how to use them, because they all play off one another and integrate. So even in social media, you see a lot of traditional media being replayed in social media, and the same players that are creating that content also have channels on all these different social channels. So it's if you learn the way it works, it's not as hard to figure out.
So social media, Fred, a lot of stuff I read is that social media engagement, statistically is on the decline. And I'm not saying the death of social media, but are you getting that vibe from the younger generation that that social is not quite what it used to be? And what's going to take its place?
Well, it depends on what you refer to as social. I mean, the platforms come and go. Some become popular and some become unpopular over time. And there's always new ones coming on the online that people are interested in. I don't think it's going away. In our survey, we asked people whether they thought that social media would be the primary source of news in the future. And majority of people said yes, especially younger people. They also thought that influencers on social media would be the primary marketing vehicle for companies to build their brands and sell their products. So I think that is still going to be the direction of travel. And I think legacy media is going to continue to decline. I don't see any way that that's going to come back in a big way. So I think it may not be growing as fast as it used to, but I think the trajectory is going to be the same as it has been for the last decade.
So is your sense that this is all just democratizing? If traditional media or one-stop shop want to get something above the fold in the newspaper, that idea is like dead these days.
Yeah.
Is this just democratization of comms?
Well, it depends who you ask. If you ask older people who are used to legacy media, they feel like it's democratization, but it's also going to be misinformation and a loss of credibility and that sort of thing. If you ask younger people, they feel more positive about it. They feel more like now everybody has a voice, and that social media is going to be just as relevant and just as credible as traditional media has been. So there's a difference of opinion depending on what you've grown up with. The PR people that have grown up with social media feel totally comfortable with that. They would rather find content for TikTok, create content for TikTok, than they would pitch the New York Times, which they have no idea about. So I think that it's all from your point of view.
Fred, I wanted to ask about human nature. So when you look at newspapers, broadcast channels, especially sort of 20, 30 years ago, you have left of center, right of center. And as political animals, what we're seeing is when social media first started coming around, the last sort of 15, 20 years, it was almost like this utopia moment where everybody actually had a town square. Whether you were left or right, we would go on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. And now you're beginning to see social media channels actually following the same sort of politicization that you see in sort of traditional legacy media. And do you think that's just basically human nature that cut the utopia of the town hall of social media and then turned it into the politicization of the legacy media that we've always had? In the UK, we have The Guardian on one side and The Times and The Telegraph on the other. The US, you have the same. So that's obviously been quite recent with Elon Musk's foray into owning social media and also US politics.
Well, it's a good question, and I think the answer is a little bit discouraging, actually. What's happened is that the media have found out that being polarized it's not a disagreement anymore. It's a marketing strategy. And being polarized allows you to get more viewers, get more donations, get more votes, whether you're in the politics or in the media. And so people are being polarized because channels are being polarized because that attracts viewers who already believe what they believe. And that's why it's getting worse and not going away, because it's a way to build your audience, and it's a way to build your brand, and as an individual or as a media channel. And I think that's the scary part of polarization, that people are polarized on purpose because it benefits them to take some extreme view on something. And they realize a lot of people aren't going to disagree with them, but they don't care because there's a lot of people who do. And it creates these echo chambers online, and that people just reinforce each other's views and spread them on social media. And it's a big cause of why we're so polarized.
So and I'm a curious person. I know Fred from other discussions, you think PR people should be curious. And the curiosity in me that stands out is maybe that's the path for PR. Maybe that's our role, is to help build the bridges between these constantly separating poles of opinion. But on the other hand, it feels like the industry is kind of killing itself with regard to curiosity, because we all conform. and we all seek comfort, and we use AI continuously, and it's just scouring what others have said. Yeah, not much of a question there, more of an observation, and looking for your take on that.
Well, one of the most staggering numbers in our recent survey was that every year we ask the question, do you think companies are responsible for getting engaged with social issues, regardless of whether it impacts their business? And the numbers of PR people that believe that have been in the past the last couple of years, like 89, 85, and it dropped to like 54% this year. So the number of people who believe organizations have a responsibility to talk about social issues has plummeted. And I think I would have never predicted that. A few years ago, I thought that purpose was going to be the trajectory of our business, and we were going to be talking more and more about what organizations are doing to improve the world. And the appetite for that has dropped by half almost. So I think there is a big change. Why? Because it's not politically smart to do that anymore, because there's so much risk associated with it in this political and polarized environment. You lose customers, you get penalized by the government. There are all kinds of penalties for speaking out, and so people are afraid to do it. And I think that's been the biggest change. And I think there's some curiosity associated with that. Venturing outside of your comfort zone is not very positive right now. People are not willing to do that.
See, but at the same time, Gen Z in particular wants us to take a stand.
Yeah,
they want CEOs right? So are those conflicting messages, or are we seeing a change?
I don't know yet. I think the question is whether Gen Z still expects companies to do this and to get engaged, and the older generations do not anymore. So the question is whether Gen Z will change the dynamic in the next 5 or 10 years, or whether they will become disillusioned like everyone else and just give in to what is the current state. And I don't know the answer to that. I hope that they will change things, but I'm not 100% convinced that they will.
I confess, I want business leaders to take a stand. I just want them to take my stand. That's all.
Yeah, everybody feels the same way.
It could actually be two separate things where Gen Z do want their CEOs to take a stand, but actually the comms people don't, because the comms people know that if you please this Gen Z, then this Gen Z is not going to be very happy. Right. So maybe from the comms people, it's actually you don't want to choose, so you end up being Switzerland, you end up being neutral, you end up being a little bit bland because you don't want to offend, and perhaps it leaves them between a rock and a hard place where you're either called out for silence on social issues, or if you take a stand, you then lose half of your market. So it's quite a difficult terrain to navigate.
It is difficult, and that's why people are opting out to say nothing, and because it's a hard thing to navigate. But there are still companies that are going to speak out. There are ones that are like Patagonia, for instance, and Nike and Levi's. They're companies that have a strong commitment to their corporate values, and they're going to always speak out. It's just there's not very many these days. And a few years ago when Black Lives Matter happened, everyone was talking about equality and racial equality and racial injustice. But now there's just a handful that are still doing it. I think that'll change, but it's a question of when and how much over time. But we can only wait and see.
I think the ones who do speak out, they're very clear in knowing who their audience and their customers are. And so it's not as if they're being enormously altruistic. It's more they know their market and they know it resonates with their market, and they don't have a wider market that are those for and against. They've got sort of clear.
It's much more difficult for a company. It's much more difficult for a company like McDonald's or Walmart that serves a whole vast demographic of people to have a point on a controversial issue.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any change in the younger generation, the PR folks coming up the chain here, in taking a localized view as opposed to a global view? And kind of what I mean by that is, on the podcast here, we deliberately take a very global view. Someone's opinion from Africa, someone's opinion from Pakistan, from Australia, from the US, from Canada, the UK. It's a variety of opinions. And on paper, that sounds awesome, of course. But in reality, is it better to focus on localized opinion? But where are the young folks at?
Well, the young people in the United States are very ethnocentric in terms of their political and social views. They don't know much about what's going on in the rest of the world, as much as the rest of the world knows what's going on about the U.S.
Agree.
And I think that's unfortunate that we're not global citizens in that regard, because the media that we are in contact with, that we're associated with, mainly focuses on the U.S. So we're sort of in a bubble. I give a map test to my students, and they're graduates. These are smart kids, and just for fun in my class. And very rarely do they know where any of the countries are around the world. They're just not, Americans are just not very global minded. And I think that's something that needs to change. We need to be more in touch with what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in other countries than we are today. Young people need to, and they have to start by knowing where they are and what kind of political parties and what's the situation there. But right now, they're more interested in what's happening with Britney Spears or something like that, or Taylor Swift, than they are what's happening globally. And there's reasons for that. I think people have a certain fears about the rest of the world that they're valid, but ignoring it isn't the way to overcome those fears. I think we have to try to take in as much as we can from a global perspective and figure out what it means for our own lives.
I've often wondered, Fred, because our media in the UK, we're quite sort of global and outward looking.
Yes, the UK is more than the US, for sure.
Yeah, and we're obsessed with the US. So, I often sort of follow US politics more than my cousins who live in the US. And I just want to know why. Why is the US media more insular and not outward looking? And why is the UK, who, we're quite culturally similar in some regards, why has that sort of that shift? I mean, one of my cousins said to me, it's because, listen, we don't have as many holidays as you, so we're not traveling all the time. And then the other reason he gave me was, he's like, also, we're so blessed with our country that if we want to see mountains or sea, we just don't have to leave the US. We can have that. And there's enough cultural diversity and geographical diversity that we don't have to leave. I mean, that was the answer he gave me, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Well, there's some truth to that answer. I mean, people in the U.S. like to go to Las Vegas. It's one of the biggest destinations. And there you can go in the Venice canals, you can see the Eiffel Tower, you can see the pyramids of Egypt, all in one place without ever changing money or needing a passport. I think, and Americans don't have passports. The percentage of Americans that have passports is much lower than it is in the UK and other countries. Wow. I think there's an element of what you said. We have everything that we need here, but I think there's also a fear of anti-Americanism, and a fear of being ripped off, and a fear of cultures and not speaking the language. And I think some Americans just aren't comfortable traveling as abroad the way that Europeans go from country to country. And I don't think that right now, unfortunately, I don't think we feel as welcome in places as we used to, because of the politics of our country are not popular right now. So I think Americans feel more safe and comfortable at home. In Mexico City, there were protests just 2 weekends ago about Americans coming there to live and to visit. In Barcelona, they're squirting people with squirt guns. I think that there's an element, and you shouldn't be afraid of a squirt gun, but there's an anti-American element out there right now that's real for people.
Fred, really appreciate your time today. This is good stuff. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure.
Fred, I do have a question for you that has been left by our previous guest, Ayeni. And Ayeni, he asked the following question. What would PR, the world of PR, look like if agencies ceased to exist?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think that I don't think it's likely to happen. I've worked in PR agencies my whole life, and Golan mainly, and I think that agencies play a vital role in communications. But it's an interesting time right now. I think with all of the things that are happening, agencies' role is changing, and I think that the agencies who adapt to the changes that are taking place with artificial intelligence and with the media and with hybrid will evolve and be just as vital as they always have been. But the ones that don't, the ones that are relying upon the strategies of the past, I think are going to have a tough time. So right now we're seeing, in this period of disruption, we're seeing a little bit of shakeout, I think, in the agency world, and we'll see what happens. As far as replacing them, I don't think that's likely. I think some of the tasks that agencies perform will be done by AI more cheaply and simply, quickly. But agencies will have to reformulate what their offering is in order to not compete with artificial intelligence, but adapt to a world where some of these mundane tasks can be done all by with a computer. But I think for the smart ones, it's going to be, the future looks bright. It may not be for everybody, though.
Yeah, adapt or die. I agree.
Yeah.
But Fred, like, if I was in-house, do you think some in-house people are thinking, well, actually, I could just use AI tools rather than farm out work to agencies? So, are agencies really in a strong position?
Well, I met with someone I know over the weekend, and they do corporate PR for a B2B AI company. And they don't use an agency anymore. They use AI tools instead. But it's a small company. It's a B2B company. And I think maybe that will work for them. But I think for the larger, bigger brands, that's not an option. They're going to continue to need the strategy and the intelligence and the creativity that agencies bring. And I think that's going to be even more valuable in the future than maybe it is now. But it's just different. I mean, if you look at the Cannes Awards for PR, Golan has won several in the last couple of years, and mainly they're for what look like television commercials. They're not run on broadcast, but they're on the internet, but they look like TV commercials. And that's so we're creating content that is different than we did 10 years ago, and that's what's working. So as long as we're adapting to the changes, I think that'll be fine.
Your turn, Fred. What question would you like to leave behind for the next guest to pontificate on?
Well, the one that I'm pondering the most is one we've been talking about, is this polarization idea. We've studied that at USC for the last few years, and it seems to be almost a permanent condition. And I for one, believe that it's really a negative impact on people on a political level, a personal level, on a social level, a family level. And I guess the question is, what can be done to reduce polarization in the world, especially in the United States, in the current circumstances we're in? How can that be reduced? And I wish I had the answer to that, but I don't.
I do. More podcasts. Long conversations lead to understanding.
Well, it depends if the conversations are including people from both sides. And that's the difference. I think the conversations are happening. They're just not happening with each other.
Brilliant.
So we'll see.
Thanks again, Fred. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.